I'd like to invite Mike Sentonas, Chief Technology Officer of CrowdStrike. Mike, please.
Hi there. Thanks for connecting to this session. My name is Mike Sentonas. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at CrowdStrike. I was really hoping to be able to be at the event in person, more importantly to be in Israel. I've been wanting to get back to Tel Aviv. I spent a bit of time there last year. Really enjoyed the trip, especially looking forward to get back to meet the team. We just made a significant acquisition of Preempt Security. So we've got over 40 people now based in Israel, which I'd love to get back to and to see so many customers and people across the wonderful country. But unfortunately, travel is not possible right now. So we're going to have to use this online format. You get a little bit about me on the screen there. What I will say is that Israel is going to be one of the first countries that I do visit when I can travel. We've got some, as mentioned, we've got some great staff there, some great customers that I want to get back and see. And I'm incredibly excited about the work that we can do with Preempt to pull together identity together with workload security, threat intelligence, and threat hunting that we do here at CrowdStrike. I'm always incredibly impressed with the skills and the talent and look forward to meeting more and more people. So certainly reach out after this session. It's obviously an understatement for me to say it's been a challenging year. And I wanted to share some recent threat research that we've just wrapped up that I think you'll find very interesting. But it's also really concerning when you look at the state of cybercrime around the world whilst we're dealing with a pandemic, whilst we're dealing with a work from home situation. I don't like to talk too much about remote work because it's not a new concept, but what I do prefer to talk about is digital transformation that happened earlier on this year when a lot of people suddenly went home at the end of a working week and haven't gone back. So as an example, I haven't been back to an office since pretty much March, which is representative of what we see a lot around the world. So to give you a little bit of context as to where some of this data comes from, we're correlating around 4.3 trillion telemetry events, signals from our endpoints from all around the world every single week. So it gives us an incredible amount of information to look at the state of cybercrime, the state of nation-state activity, the techniques, the tradecraft. And I'm going to share a little bit about this with you in the session that we've got, a short amount of time we've got together, because we've seen an astounding increase in hands-on targeted attacks and e-crime activity in the first half of 2020. To give you some interesting statistics, in the first 4 or 5 months of this year, we saw a 331% increase over the same period of the previous year. No surprise, we've seen technology and manufacturing, financial, and unfortunately, during what's going on around the world, we've seen a huge uptick in attacks against healthcare, which I'll talk about in a moment. But as mentioned, a huge increase in the amount of e-crime activity. Let me talk a little bit about what's driving that growth. And talk a little bit about the types of attacks that we're seeing, and I'll go through some examples. The best way to quantify the issue and what's going on around the world right now is to look at the CrowdStrike Falcon Overwatch report that we released a couple of weeks ago now. It's titled, it's the 2020 Threat Hunting Report, and it has information about threat data from CrowdStrike Falcon Overwatch, which is our industry-leading threat hunting team that operates 24/7, 365 days around the world. What's interesting for me when I look at the growth in cyber attacks, it is purely focused and driven by e-crime activity, attacks motivated by financial gain. Nothing new. I don't think that'll be a surprise to anyone listening to the session, but the scale and the brazen attacks that we're seeing is what's definitely new. The first half of 2020, the hands-on keyboard intrusion activity that we observed surpassed all of 2019. So the first 6 months of this year, with everything that we've got going on around the world, we've seen more hands-on keyboard intrusion activity than all of 2019. What that means is by the end of this year, it's going to be a pretty challenging year, a pretty devastating year for a lot of organizations and governments around the world that have come under heavy cyber attack. And certainly that's showing no signs of slowing down for the remainder of this year and into next year. Obviously, the growth here is driven primarily by the continued acceleration of e-crime activity. And this sort of really brings home the trend that we've seen over the last couple of years, where we have seen e-crime activity continue to outpace state-sponsored activity. Not because we've seen a reduction in nation-state attacks, but it's simply because there's so much money being made. We've seen so much activity from state-based, from e-crime actors, that number is just absolutely dwarfing state-based activity. So what's behind this massive growth in e-crime activity? I've talked about it already. Basically money, motivation driven for pure financial gain. What we're seeing so far this year that I find quite interesting is a lot of changes in the business models, the models that the adversaries use. There's certainly a lot more brazen. A lot more money is being made. The ransom sizes are growing constantly. And what it means is there's a lot more people joining the party. We see, for example, a huge growth in ransomware as a service. You don't need to develop it anymore. You just have to use the technology that you effectively rent from somebody else, and you give them a cut of the profit. We see a lot of extortion, data extortion. That's why we start to see more and more of this terminology called double extortion, which I'll talk about as well. Real opportunistic attackers, and I'll touch on that as a little bit. And unfortunately, what it means is we're just seeing more and more people driving towards e-crime activity, getting involved, creating a very challenging atmosphere, as I've talked about already. So if I was going to summarize the approach that we see today of a lot of e-crime actors, I've touched on it already. These actors are nothing if not aggressive, extremely brazen. We're seeing devices that were exposed to the internet get hit with tens of thousands of attacks and tens of thousands of login attempts in a few hours, as an example, suffering password spraying attacks and brute force attacks. We see adversaries, once they're on a box, start to move through their heavily scripted kill chain in a matter of minutes. Most of the tools that they use are off the shelf. They don't do very much to hide them, and they live off the land and they move laterally across an organization. What that means to me is that they simply don't care about being caught. The adversaries prepare the environment. So we're seeing a lot more activity where the adversaries don't use malware, they don't use traditional ransomware. They use a lot of operating system tools. They use a lot of techniques to prepare the environment for maximum impact. They do that because it gives them the best opportunity to ask for more amounts of money. And if an organization doesn't respond to the request for money, the devastation that they carry out sends a message to other people in the industry. And then the final point that I will make is we see significantly more opportunistic attacks, and attacks where the targeting of victims is indiscriminate. Unfortunately, as mentioned, healthcare has come under significant focus this year, and I'll give a couple of examples as we go through this. A couple of things that I thought would be interesting to share with everybody. When you look at the growth of ransomware today, what's interesting to investigate is the ecosystem and how the money is being made. And a few interesting things have happened over the last couple of weeks that I thought I would share and really summarizes what's going on right now. At the end of September, the group behind the Revil ransomware, really started to ramp up hiring of affiliates for their ransomware business. As mentioned before, a lot of ransomware operations are conducted as ransomware as a service. The developers in charge of developing the ransomware and the payment sites, the extortion sites, recruit people to their business to hack businesses and encrypt devices. Now, this example here of this group that's behind the Revil operation deposited $1 million in Bitcoins in a Russian-speaking hacker site, a hacker forum, to show potential affiliates, potential business partners, that they're the real deal. They mean business. What's interesting about this is part of the arrangement, the developers will take 20 or 30%. The affiliates will take 70-80% of the ransom payments that they generate. But what was very interesting about this situation is the hacker forum allows members to deposit Bitcoins into a wallet hosted by the site. The reason why I say that's really interesting is not only can other members see the full members' deposits, and those deposits are used to privately buy and sell illicit services through the forum, but what it illustrates is this group is showing everybody how much money is to be made, and what they're showing is they don't really care if the forum administrators could steal it. So it sends a significant message, and it's really captured a lot of attention very, very quickly. I talked about ransomware as a service. Let's explore the concept now that you'll start to hear more and more if you haven't heard about it already, and the terminology called double extortion. We presented this concept of data being used as a weapon back in 2016. At the time, at CrowdStrike, we talked about nation-state actors looking to steal data, to weaponize that data, to use it against organizations. Today, we're seeing that same exact tactic, but this time via e-crime groups and through the use of dedicated leak sites. And really, it's a basic model. Attackers are looking for ways to generate ransom payments. They're looking for ways to increase the size of the ransomware payments. And importantly, what they're looking to do is pile on a lot more pressure, guarantee people will pay. And if people have backups and they have the ability to recover very, very quickly, they can still guarantee some form of high value ransom payment. Let's pivot and look at a couple of the groups. The first group that I want to talk about is Twisted Spider. This is the criminal group behind the development of ransomware that you probably have heard of called Maze. Whilst the ransomware is not new, it was first observed in around May of 2019. The group got notoriety around the end of last year, around November 2019, with their brazen attacks. This is also the group that really started to release data if the ransomware the ransom wasn't paid. So what we saw was that this group created a dedicated website to leak data. They would take a copy of the data, and if you were targeted and you were not responsive or you refused to pay the ransom, this group would actually leak data publicly, again putting pressure on you to pay that ransom. The group became very big at the start of 2020, so really kicked off around February of this year. Ransomware amounts sort of range between $1,200 for a consumer, for a home user, which is a staggering increase to seeing ransomware being $100, $150, $200 only a couple of years ago. And for businesses, we've seen examples of ransom requests upwards of $7.5 million, which is just an incredible amount of money for an organization to be faced with, a ransom request for an organization to be faced with. Next is Pinchy Spider. This is the criminal group behind the development of ransomware, commonly known as GandCrab, and it's also the group that's behind Revil. And this was really brought into operation at the beginning of 2019. This group, Pinchy Spider, makes financial gain from the split of the ransomware payments received from its partners. So we see this group very active. We also think that they leverage that ransomware themselves, a variant of that ransomware for 100% profit gain. And here's another group that exfiltrates data using Revil and then threatens data leak if the victims refuse to pay. And this group has really started to auction off a lot of data. And in June of this year, they really escalated a lot of their work, where they were, as mentioned, auctioning off data from organizations that had been hit with their malicious software. So to me, it really marks an escalation in tactics aimed at coercing victims to pay up, to put pressure on victims and to really shame those that don't. So, the thing, when I look at this, it also may signal that ransomware purveyors are searching for new ways to profit. They're looking for new ways to monetize their victims during unprecedented times when potentially some organizations are struggling with cash flow. They're really looking to see how they can pile on the pressure. I talked about this earlier, and this is the one that really concerns me, where we see attacks on the healthcare sector hitting unprecedented levels. You know, it's interesting, at the start of this year, there was a lot of discussion around a moratorium against healthcare providers, and we just haven't seen that. We've seen a huge increase, and it's inevitable that there will be threats that spill over and impact people's health and well-being. I'll use a couple of examples. A few weeks ago, one of the United States' largest hospital chains, Universal Health Services, started to divert ambulances from some facilities after a crippling ransomware attack. Whilst they said that the outage didn't harm patients, but it impacted systems used to hold medical records, laboratory information, and pharmacies were offline. Across about 250 facilities, what we are starting to see is this trend where patients have to be diverted to other hospitals or other facilities. In a separate incident in Germany, prosecutors have launched an investigation where a woman has actually died when the ambulance that she was in was diverted from the University Hospital of Dusseldorf. That ransomware hit on September 10. It shut down computer systems, and it forced ambulances to be rerouted away from emergency rooms for approximately 13 days. So the concept of attacking medical facilities has always been a major concern, but now we're starting to really see this come into a real significant focus. And simply put, any delay in patient care at some point will have a direct link to patient harm, which is a huge concern for all of us. So let me kind of start to wrap up here. Whilst data extortion is not a new trend, whilst ransomware is not a new concept, what I do have no doubt in is that the remainder of this year and throughout 2021, we're going to hear about more and more ransomware attacks, especially attacks that are defined as double extortion attacks. I strongly believe with this whole move to working from anywhere, now that we have absolutely no perimeter to sit behind, we will start to see more and more attacks that take place. You know, what's also interesting, as organizations start to improve their capabilities to rebound from ransomware attacks, and researchers start to continue to create decryptors for ransomware, I believe that there's going to be less incentives for victims to pay up, which is going to drive criminal groups to find new ways to monetize the victims, new ways to carry out the attacks. So this overall trend of exfiltrating data, selling data, outright leaking victim information will continue as long as people are willing to pay the ransom. So, summary, it's critical that each and every one of you protect yourselves, protect the organizations that you work for. It would be remiss of me to not leave you some advice, a few recommendations. Of course, the best protection against ransomware is prevention, using next generation technology that can deal with the frequency, the velocity of the attacks. Ensure technology is rolled out together with EDR, especially to make sure that there's no blind spots in systems and you can deal with attacks where the adversary is not using ransomware. Invest in human threat hunting, practice good hygiene, protect all of your users' identities, routinely monitor authentication logs and account creation, and enlist all of your employees in the fight. Whilst technology is critical in the fight against ransomware and the fight against attackers, the end user remains that crucial link to stop breaches. We could talk about attacks all days. We could talk about tradecraft and technology for hours, but I am out of time. As mentioned, I look forward to visiting your wonderful country soon. Stay safe and stay secure. Bye for now.